My mother got the call at 6:47 inches the morning. By 8:15, she was standing at the nurse's station on the third floor of Toronto General, signing a form she hadn't read. By 9:02, she was gone. I know the times because the security logs are precise. I pulled them later, when I could hold a pen again, when my fingers stopped shaking every time I tried to write my own name. My name is Claire Whitfield. I'm 31 years old. I was, until the morning of February the 14th, the senior operations director at a mid-sized accounting firm in the financial district. I had a corner office on the 22nd floor, with a view of Lake Ontario that I never had time to look at. I had a closet full of blazers in 7 shades of gray. I had $94,000 in an RRSP, a max TFSA, and exactly 0 friends I could call at 3 in the morning. What I didn't have was a life. I hadn't had one in almost a decade. It started the way these things always start. Quietly, reasonably. My father's heart attack in 2017 wiped out their savings after the cardiac rehab and the private physio he insisted on, because the OHIP waitlist was too long. My mother couldn't work anymore, she said, because of her fibromyalgia, though she still had energy to redo the kitchen cabinets twice and book 2 weeks in Mont Tremblant every January. My younger sister, Brittany, was in her final year at Western, studying something vague and expensive involving fashion merchandising. Someone had to keep the lights on in the Oakville house. That someone was me. I started with $500 a month, then 8, then 12. By the time I was 28, I was transferring $3,000 every payday and another $1,500 on the first of every month for what my mother called the shortfall. I covered Brittany's tuition when her OSAP ran out. I covered the property taxes when my parents forgot, twice in 1 year. I covered the replacement furnace, the new roof, my sister's dental work, my mother's trip to a wellness retreat in Sedona that cost more than my rent. I lived in a 1-bedroom in Liberty Village and ate rice and frozen vegetables 4 nights a week. I walked to work to save on the TTC. My winter coat was 6 years old. I told myself this was what responsible daughters did. I told myself my mother loved me. I told myself the look on her face when I handed over a check was pride, not hunger. It was hunger. I just couldn't see it yet. The morning I collapsed, I had been awake for 31 hours. We were finalizing the audit for a manufacturing client in Hamilton, and I'd been running on espresso and stress since Tuesday. My mother had called me 6 times that week. Brittany was getting married in July to a commercial real estate broker named Devin, whose parents owned a cottage in Muskoka, and the wedding had become a small war. My mother wanted a destination ceremony in Whistler. Brittany wanted Niagara on the Lake. Devin's mother wanted Vaughan. The one thing they all agreed on was that I should pay. I remember standing up from my desk at 5:23 on the morning of February 14th. I remember the fluorescent light turning into a white ribbon. I remember thinking, for a strange half-second, about a girl I'd known in grade 7, who used to braid my hair during homeroom. I don't know why she came to mind. I hadn't thought about her in 20 years. Then the floor hit my face. The cleaning crew found me at 5:51. I had a brain bleed, grade 2, non-traumatic, brought on by sustained hypertension and severe exhaustion. The paramedics took me to Toronto General. They induced a medical coma at 6:12 a.m. to reduce the swelling. My mother was my emergency contact. The hospital called her at 6:47. She was at the hospital by 8:15, as I said. She signed the consent for the decompression procedure. She stood in the ICU corridor for 47 minutes. And then, at 9:02, she left. She didn't go home. She drove to Pearson, met my father and Brittany and Devin, and boarded a WestJet flight to Kelowna for a long-planned wedding venue scouting trip in the Okanagan. The tickets, she would later tell me, were non-refundable. The vineyard had been booked 6 months in advance. Brittany had been so looking forward to it. I woke up on the morning of February 21st. 7 days. The first thing I saw was the ceiling tile directly above my bed. There were 144 holes in it. I counted them twice before I realized I was counting. The second thing I saw was a nurse named Priya, who was adjusting my IV with the kind of careful, practiced gentleness that told me she already knew the answer to the question I was about to ask. "Is anyone here?" I said. My voice came out like gravel in a coffee grinder. Priya's hand paused on the IV line, just for a second. Then she smiled and said, "Let me get the doctor, sweetheart." That pause told me everything. There were no flowers in my room, no cards, no balloons tied to the bedrail. The only thing on my side table was a plastic cup with a bent straw and a box of tissues. My phone was in the drawer, dead. When I finally got it charged, 2 days later, I had 41 missed calls, 38 of them from my assistant Mira, 3 from a junior analyst, and 0 from my family. There were, however, text messages. The first was from my mother, sent on February 15th at 11:43 a.m. Pacific Time. "Sylvia knows you're in the hospital. Can you authorize a transfer of $4,200 to the Sparkling Hills Spa? The deposit is non-refundable, and we're here already. If you're awake enough to read this, please respond." Her name for me was Sylvia. I hadn't gone by Sylvia since I was 6. My legal name is Claire. I changed it, with my mother's furious permission, the summer before I started grade 1, because the kids in the neighborhood had been calling me Sylvia the silly villain. My mother had always refused to call me Claire. Always. 25 years. Every birthday card, every Christmas gift, every voicemail, Sylvia. The second text. From the next morning. "We saw a lovely venue today. The owner says he'll hold it for 48 hours if we put down 15%. That's $18,750. Can you e-transfer to my account? Brittany is crying. She's worked so hard for this." And the third, from Brittany herself, on February 17th. "Mom says you're fine, just resting. When you're up, can you also send $5,000 for my bridal shower? Aunt Lynn wants to do it at her place in Burlington, and I need to cover the catering. Also, Devon's mom keeps looking at my engagement ring like it's a cubic zirconia lol. Can you help with an upgrade?" I read them 3 times. My head felt like a church bell someone was still hitting. And somewhere underneath the fog of the medication and the ringing in my ears, something I had never felt before began to move. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was quieter than that. It was the feeling of a door closing very slowly, in a room I hadn't realized I'd been sitting in. Priya came back with a doctor named Hassan. He explained, gently and carefully, about the brain bleed, the coma, the craniotomy, the drain they had placed and then removed. He said I was lucky. He said a few more hours, and I wouldn't be here. "Who brought me in?" I asked. "The paramedics," he said. "After that, who came? Who signed things?" He hesitated. "Your mother signed the initial consent. After that, the paperwork was handled by a designated alternate." "Who?" Hassan glanced at his chart. "A gentleman named Richard Thorne. He was listed as a secondary emergency contact on file." I didn't know a Richard Thorne. "He's been here every evening," Priya said, softly, from behind the doctor. "He signs in at the front desk at 7 p.m. He stays until about midnight. He brought you flowers the first 3 nights, but we had to move them to the nurse's station because of the infection protocols. He asked us not to tell you his name." I stared at her. "He said," Priya continued, "that he didn't want to frighten you. He said if you asked, we were to give you the visitor log and let you decide for yourself." The visitor log was a green cloth-bound book that the front desk kept for the ICU ward. Priya brought it to me the next afternoon, on a clear plastic tray with my lunch. I waited until she left. Then I opened it. The entries for my room were all on the same page, 7 in a row, each one signed in the same hand, blue ballpoint, slightly slanted. The letters small and careful, the way my grandfather had written before he died. Richard Thorne. Feb 13, 7:03 p.m. Room 3802. Richard Thorne. Feb 15, 7:08 p.m. Room 3802. And so on, every night. A man named Richard Thorne had sat beside my bed for 5 hours, every evening, for a week. I traced the signature with my finger. I had never seen the name before, but something in the slant of the letters was familiar in a way I couldn't place, like a song you half remember from a car trip when you were a kid. I was still staring at the book when the door opened and my mother walked in. She had a tan. That was the first thing I noticed. A real tan, the kind you get from a week outdoors in the sun, not a spray booth. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere coat I had bought her for Christmas 2 years ago. And her hair was freshly done. She was pulling a small rolling suitcase behind her. "Oh, thank God," she said. "They said you were up. I came straight from the airport." She did not hug me. She stopped at the foot of the bed and looked at me the way you'd look at a car you were thinking of buying. Assessing. A little tired. "Your father sends his love. Brittany is with Devon's parents this afternoon. We just got in on the red-eye. Sylvia, honestly, you gave us such a scare. Are you feeling well enough to come home? I've already spoken to the nurse about the discharge papers." I didn't answer right away. I was watching her face. "We need to get you out of here," she went on. "The hospital is charging your extended benefits already, and you know how they pad those bills. Your father looked into it. We should transfer you to the walk-in physio place near the house, and just handle the rest at home. I've made up the spare room. It'll be like old times." "Mom," I said. "Yes, sweetheart? Who is Richard Thorne?" She had been reaching for her phone. Her hand stopped mid-motion. She didn't look up. "I don't know that name. He's been listed as my secondary emergency contact for 7 years. He's been in this room every night for a week. He's the reason I had someone to sign the forms you didn't stick around for." "Sylvia. I was in Kelowna. I know." The silence that followed was not the kind of silence where someone is thinking of what to say. It was the kind where someone is calculating how much you already know. She sat down slowly in the chair by the window. She did not take off her coat. "Where did you hear that name?" she said. "The front desk gave me the visitor log." "You're the one who asked for it, actually. When you came to ask about the discharge, the nurse told me you went pale and left the ward." "I did not. Priya is right there. I can call her in." My mother's mouth moved, then closed, then opened again. "That man is nothing to you, Sylvia. Nothing. Whatever he's told you, whatever he's tried to. He hasn't told me anything. I haven't met him. I'm asking you." She stood up again. She was already backing toward the door. "This is not a conversation for a hospital. We'll discuss it at home. When you're stronger. Right now you need to rest. And I need to speak with your doctor about transferring you to Mom." "Who is he?" Her hand was on the door frame. Her knuckles were white. "He's a man I knew a long time ago," she said. "Before your father. It was a mistake. Please, Sylvia, for the love of God, leave it alone." "Is he my father?" She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her face answered for her. She turned, fast, the rolling suitcase catching on the threshold, and she walked out of the room without another word. I asked Priya to call him. Richard Thorne. I asked her to tell him that I was awake, that I knew, and that if he wanted to come, he could come. He came at 7:01 that evening. He was exactly on time. He was a tall man, in his early 60s, with the kind of thin gray hair that had been red once, the way mine was red now. He was wearing a navy peacoat that had seen better winters, and carrying a paper bag from a bakery in Leslieville. His hands were shaking. "Claire," he said, from the doorway. "Not Sylvia. Claire." I hadn't cried through any of it, not the coma, not the texts, not the conversation with my mother. I started crying when he said my name. He sat down in the chair my mother had just vacated. He did not try to touch me. He put the paper bag on the side table and folded his hands in his lap, and he said, "I have rehearsed this conversation for 31 years, and I still don't know where to start. Start with why you waited." He nodded slowly. "Your mother was married to your father when you were conceived. I didn't know she was married. I thought she was separated. We had been seeing each other for about 4 months. When she found out about you, she ended it. She told me if I ever contacted her, ever tried to see you, She would file a restraining order and tell my employer I had assaulted her. I was a junior partner at a law firm at the time. I was engaged to be married. I believed her. I walked away. 31 years. I tried, Claire. I tried. When you were 4, I drove past your kindergarten. Your mother saw me from the parking lot. She called the police. I was detained for 6 hours. The charges were dropped, but her lawyer sent a cease and desist. That was essentially a letter saying, if I wanted to ruin your childhood, I could keep going. I had a wife by then. I had a son. I did not want to ruin you, so I stopped trying. Then how are you listed on my emergency forms? He smiled, just a little, sadly. 7 years ago, a woman named Mira Amati reached out to me on LinkedIn. She said she was your executive assistant. She said she was worried about you, that you never slept, that you never ate, that your family seemed to be bleeding you, and that you had no one listed as a second contact. She had found me through your mother's maiden name and a newspaper archive. She asked if I would be willing to be listed. I closed my eyes. Mira. Mira, who brought me tea every afternoon. Mira, who had once quietly asked me, over drinks 2 Christmases ago, whether I had any family outside of my mother. Mira, who had been the one to find me in the hallway that morning at 5:51. Mira, who had called 38 times. I said yes, Richard said. I asked her never to tell you. I didn't want you to meet me because of an accident. I wanted you to meet me because you chose to. But when the hospital called me at 8:30 that morning, and I got here, and the nurse told me your mother had just left for the airport, His voice cracked. He took a breath. I decided that if you woke up, you would not wake up to an empty room. And if you didn't wake up, you would not die alone. I looked at this man. This stranger with my hairline and my jaw and my hands. He had sat beside me for 7 nights in a row while my mother tanned herself in the Okanagan. He had held the hand of a daughter he had never met, because a stranger named Mira on LinkedIn had once asked him to care. Do I have a brother? I asked. Yes. His name is Evan. He's 29. He's an ER doctor in Calgary. He's known about you for 10 years. He's been waiting. I pulled the thin hospital blanket up to my chin, and I let myself, for the first time in my entire life, be someone's daughter. My mother came back the next morning with my father, and a stack of discharge forms, and a brochure for a rehabilitation clinic in Mississauga that billed on a sliding scale. She had clearly spent the night rehearsing. My father, who had never once raised his voice to me in 31 years, stood in the corner and looked at his shoes. She talked for 11 minutes without stopping. She talked about the family, about forgiveness, about how mistakes were made on all sides, about how Richard was a manipulator who had been stalking her for decades, about how Brittany was absolutely devastated to hear. I was upset and was willing to postpone the bridal shower by a week to come visit. She said the word family 42 times. I counted. When she finally ran out of breath, I said, I'd like you to leave. Sylvia, my name is Claire. You don't understand what Dad, I said. My father looked up. Did you know? He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I suspected. For about 20 years. I never asked. Because I was afraid of the answer. And I loved you anyway. I'm sorry, Claire. I am so sorry. My mother whipped around toward him. Gerald. Linda. Stop. I had never, in 31 years, heard my father tell my mother to stop. He walked over to my bed, slowly, and he put his hand on mine, and he said, You don't owe us anything. Not a penny, not an hour, not one more minute of your life. I should have said this to you 10 years ago. I should have said it when she asked you for the first $500. I will regret until I die that I didn't. Then he turned around, and he walked out of the room. My mother stood there, with her mouth open for a full 5 seconds, before she ran after him. That was the last time I saw her. I was discharged on the 1st of March. Richard drove me home in his Subaru. He had stocked my fridge. There were flowers on the kitchen counter, real ones, peonies in a glass vase, and a card that said, Welcome home, little sister, in a handwriting I didn't know yet. The weeks after were slow. I was on neurological rest for 6 weeks. I couldn't look at screens for more than 20 minutes. I couldn't make major decisions, my doctor said, so I made small ones. I closed the joint account I had kept with my mother since I was 19. I canceled the pre-authorized transfers. I wrote to the mortgage holder on my parents' Oakville house, whose monthly payment had been coming out of my checking account for 4 years, and I notified them that all future payments would be my parents' responsibility. I sent one email to my sister. It said, "The wedding is not my problem. The deposit money is not coming. Lose my number." Brittany responded within 7 minutes with a message that was 1,400 words long and contained the word selfish 11 times. Then, when that didn't work, a message that was 2,300 words long and contained the phrase, "After everything we've done for you 6 times. Then, a voicemail. Then, another voicemail. I blocked her number on a Wednesday afternoon while Richard made me tea. Devin's parents pulled out of the wedding financing in April, after my mother tried to ask them for a loan. The Niagara venue kept the deposit. Brittany posted a long, tearful video on Instagram about how her own family had betrayed her in her most important year. It got 312 views. Her engagement ended in May. Devin, it turned out, had been uncomfortable with my sister's spending habits for some time. My mother was diagnosed with early rheumatoid arthritis that spring, and for the first time in a decade had to live on my father's actual income without supplements. They downsized the house. They moved to a townhouse in Whitby. My father sent me a handwritten letter every month for a year. I read them all. I didn't answer. Not yet. Maybe one day. I took a 6-month leave from work. I flew to Calgary in June and met my brother Evan, who looked so much like me that the waitress at the cafe we went to asked if we were twins. I spent 3 weeks in his spare room. We went hiking in Kananaskis. We talked until our voices gave out. He told me stories about our father that I tucked away like letters in a drawer. Richard and I had dinner every Sunday. He never asked me for anything. He never told me what to do. He listened more than any man I had ever met. When I cried, he let me cry. When I was angry, he didn't tell me to calm down. When I told him, one evening in August, that I had lived 31 years, and never felt what I felt when he said my name that first night in the hospital, he looked at me across the table and he said, "Claire, I have lived 62 years, and never stopped feeling what I felt the first time I heard you'd been born." I went back to work in September. I took a demotion and a pay cut to a role with 40 hours a week instead of 70. I bought a new winter coat. I joined a book club in Leslieville. I learned how to cook something other than rice and frozen vegetables. I went to therapy on Tuesdays, where I talked a great deal about the word no, which, my therapist informed me, I had been physiologically incapable of saying to my mother since roughly the age of 4. I am learning it now. Slowly. The way you learn any language, you were never taught as a child. I kept the visitor log. I asked the hospital, and they gave me a photocopy of the page. I have it framed on the wall of my new apartment, which is smaller than my old one, and cheaper, and full of plants. 7 entries. The same careful, slanted handwriting. A man who had not been allowed to love me loving me anyway, every night at 7, for a week, in a room where no one else had bothered to come. My mother taught me that blood was the thing that mattered most. That family was the only tribe you could count on. That loyalty went in one direction, from me toward her, forever, without question. She was wrong about all of it. Family is not who shares your blood. Family is who signs the log. Family is who sits in the chair. Family is who says your real name when you wake up. I am Claire Whitfield. I am 32 years old now. I have a father, a brother, a best friend, named Mira, and a book club that meets on the second Thursday of every month. I have an RRSP that is finally mine. I have a winter coat that fits. And I have the word no, which is a complete sentence, and which I am finally, at long last, strong enough to say.